The next thing I have in here is a bag that contains some dried peas. These dried peas were issued to soldiers by the pint. That would have been one of the main kind of sources of vegetables, is one thing that they were issued. And if they wanted anything else in terms of fruit, vegetables and so on, they were expected to basically scrounge them from the local area, perhaps collect them from the land, buy them from locals and so on. So dried peas issued to soldiers. I then have another drawstring bag, this time containing rice, and again, rice being a staple is something that was issued to soldiers. They were also often issued flour, so this bag sometimes contains rice, sometimes contains flour. When soldiers were issued flour, there are a number of things they could do with it. What soldiers might often do is gather the flour together as a group, so perhaps within a platoon or within a company, and they would hand that flour over to someone in the regiment who would bake it into bread and then return it to them. And so what you would do is I would give in my kind of week's ration of flour, and each day I'd be able to draw a loaf of bread back from the baker. So that's one thing you might do. Sometimes in lieu of flour, or if soldiers were travelling on long journeys, they're issued with biscuits. Now, biscuits, you might also hear them referred to as ship's biscuit, are simply flour and water baked together until it's very hard. And, you know, this is genuinely very hard. You can just about break it in half. I should probably say that I baked these biscuits probably about 3 years ago now, and to be honest, they're no more or less edible than they were then. They are very tough, they are very hard, and they still smell fine, don't smell mouldy, but if they did, you could simply chip the mould off. There are stories of people breaking their teeth trying to eat these biscuits. However, they were a useful food source for soldiers. Later on, during the American Revolution, there are soldiers who talk about being marched as a company past a barrel of biscuits, and soldiers just filling their pockets as they went, because that was going to be their bread for their journey to wherever they were going. So that's my biscuit, and I carry a few of these because it is a very efficient way of carrying a quantity of effectively bread. What can you do with these? Well, you can break them up, you can put them into any kind of stew, and they add a bit of bulk. So that's mainly what I tend to use them for. In addition to the food you've seen, a soldier might be issued with a quantity of meat. Usually a pound of beef or pork would be issued. And bearing in mind these soldiers didn't have much by way of kind of cooking equipment, cooking accoutrements, their diet would have been fairly simple. I would expect that if you think about what I have here, I have peas, I have rice, I have some parched corn, I have some biscuit, and I might potentially also have a pound of meat. The logical thing to do with that is to put it into some sort of large pot or kettle and basically boil it until it's cooked to produce a boring but nourishing soup or stew. And that probably would have been something that soldiers ate very often. So, those are my biscuits. To liven things up a little bit, I also have a horn containing rum. And again, this is made from cow's horn, it has wooden plugs at each end, and this contains a small quantity of rum that I can carry with me to help while away the cold evenings or to keep me warm, and as a kind of a valuable morale booster. So that's my rum horn, and I keep that just tucked into this simple leather bag, just to provide it with a little bit of protection and stop it hopefully from leaking on the rest of the contents of my haversack. Next in here I have my fire making kit. This is a leather bag that's been waterproofed with beeswax. Inside the bag, or attached to the bag rather, I have my striker. Sometimes I carry this in my pocket, sometimes I carry it in this bag. I always keep it tied to something though, because they're very easy to lose. And if you don't have this, you're going to struggle to make fire. I also have inside here a piece of flint in case I can't find one. And then I have my tin, in which I carry some tinder. This is my tinder box. For tinder I carry some char cloth. This is made by, as the name suggests, taking some cloth, some rags, whatever cloth waste you have, and charring it in a fire. And the best way of doing that is just to put it into a tin, leave it on the ashes so it chars, but not letting it actually catch fire and burn. And this will catch fire quite quickly, or this will take a fire from a spark. So I make a spark using my flint and steel, and I catch it on my char cloth. I also carry in here a piece of, this is called amadou, this is a fungus. And what you can do is you can scrape this off, you can scrape bits of this off, and you can light this with a flint and steel as well. So it's an alternative way of lighting a fire. And this is fairly common, and you know, soldiers used to working and operating in the woods would know where to find things like amadou fungus in order to get a fire going. So this is another important piece of kit. Now, my fire bag is very important to me, and my hope is that because it's been waxed, because it's been treated with beeswax, I can fold this up, and this will keep my tinder, my char cloth, fairly dry. I also have in here another small leather bag, and this one contains more dried tinder and kindling, contains some tow rope which I can use to light fires or use to clean my musket if I need to. Excuse me. And I put it in here just to make sure that, also I'm doubly sure that it's dry. A flint and steel, well, if it gets wet I can always dry it on my coat and then use it. However, I need to make sure my tinder and my kindling are as dry as they can possibly be, so that's why they're in there. Next thing I have a small bag. This bag contains some lengths of rope and so on for making camp if I need them. Always handy to have some bits of rope and a couple of bits of fabric. I have a small drawstring bag that contains, I believe, tea. Again, tea was much more common in the colonies before the revolution. I don't know why, I suspect something to do with taxation, but the American colonists took a disliking to tea and switched to coffee during and after the revolution. But before the revolution, soldiers might have carried tea with them to liven up their drinks, their water in the evenings. And then at the bottom here I have a flask, and this flask you can probably hear contains shot, which are small lead balls that I can load into my musket and I can use to shoot at birds or small game. So this is I carry this with me in case I need to hunt while I'm out on patrol. The final item that's in here is perhaps a little bit controversial. This is a pewter plate. It's quite heavy, but the main reason I carry it is to represent something that was quite common for soldiers at the time, and that's looting. Now this plate is an original. It's English made, but then it's got French stamps on it, so at some point this has been bought by a French person, and I carry this because this is the kind of thing that a soldier might have seen whilst out on a raid and picked up and taken with it. However, light infantry needed to move quickly, and they needed to carry the minimum amount of kit possible. And so, whilst there are accounts of light infantrymen looting, taking items like this, actually this is fairly low value, but I might, perhaps if it was silver I might be more likely to take it. These items of, these things that they looted were quite often then discarded. There are also accounts of officers on finding their men looting, ordering them to throw everything away that they'd taken apart from food. And so, the main reason I carry this, it is useful around camp to help with eating, but it is also something that a light infantryman might have taken from a civilian on a raid, or from a raid on a baggage train, but it's also exactly the kind of thing that would very quickly be thrown off into the woods and discarded so that you can move more quickly and effectively. So, that's my plate. And that is the contents of my haversack. As you'll see in there, these items I've shown you, these give me the basics that I need to survive out in the woods for as long as I can. I have a blanket for warmth, I have some spare clothing that also provide a bit of warmth and a bit of comfort. I have food. That food might not last for a particularly long time, but soldiers who are used to operating in the woods would very quickly learn to forage and find wild food that they could eat. They also had their muskets and ammunition, so they would be able to hunt to add to what they had with them. I also have some basic washing equipment. I suspect that whilst out on lengthy patrols, soldiers wouldn't wash particularly often. However, when they were returning to camp, they were expected to appear neat and tidy and soldierly, so a wash, combing one's hair would be important. Fire-making equipment is perhaps the most important thing I have here, because whilst you are not going to be lighting fires regularly whilst out on patrol, should you find yourself lost, should you find yourself out for longer than expected, the ability to get a fire going quickly and effectively will be very important for morale. It will also allow you to cook your food. So, that concludes this episode of the 60th Presents. I hope you found it interesting. I hope that you now have a better understanding of the kind of thing that a soldier in the light infantry might have carried whilst out on patrol. I hope I've also made it clear which items in here are things that we're fairly sure that people had, and also which are items that I carry simply to make my life a little bit easier. If you have any thoughts, any questions, please do feel free to comment on the video using the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much and take care.